Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Darren Mack. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Darren Roy Mack was born on January 31, 1961, in Reno, Nevada. He graduated from Reno High School and attended the University of Nevada. From a young age, he worked at a pawn shop called Palace Jewelry and Loan, which was owned by his parents. In 1986, Darren's father was killed in an airplane crash, and Darren became half owner of the pawn shop. He continued working in the business after graduating from college and earned quite a bit of money. Darren married and divorced twice. During his second marriage, he had 2 children. In 1994, he met a woman named Charlotte. She was originally from Nevada, but moved to California to pursue a dream of becoming a big-time actress. She failed and ended up moving back to Nevada. The couple became romantically involved. They married on May 13, 1995. Both Darren and Charlotte were extremely interested in having sex and engaged in swinging behavior. On December 22, 1997, they had a daughter named Erica. By 2002, Charlotte had calmed down quite a bit in terms of her sexual behavior. She was tired of swinging, but for Darren, Charlotte's attitude was a swing and a miss. The couple fought a lot about this topic. Darren wanted to go out swinging, but his effort to swing for the fences failed. In 2004, Darren moved into a townhouse in Reno, as Charlotte remained in their primary residence. On February 7, 2005, Charlotte filed for divorce. The case was assigned to a family court judge named Chuck Weller. Darren and Charlotte were unable to agree on just about anything, and the proceedings were contentious. As they continued to argue, Darren was still earning a phenomenal amount of money, about $528,000 a year. His net worth was almost $10 million. Charlotte, on the other hand, had no income at all. The judge ordered Darren to pay Charlotte $10,000 a month in spousal support, $850 a month in child support, house expenses, and a $480,000 lump sum payment. In order to avoid paying, Darren filed for bankruptcy. As he stalled, Charlotte was having serious financial problems. The electricity in her house was shut off. Judge Chuck Weller was not amused by Darren's stall tactics. Eventually, he threatened to put Darren in jail if he did not pay the money to Charlotte. Just 3 days after a particularly contentious court hearing, Darren appeared on a web-based TV show and complained about how the judge was tyrannical and terribly unfair to him. Appearing to sympathize with Darren's complaints, the interviewer made a strange and disturbing comment to him. He said, quote, "You're actually better off to murder your spouse, plead insanity, and be out in 7 years," unquote. Darren was pretty talkative during this interview, but he had no response to this. It looked like the wheels in his head were turning. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On June 12, 2006, at 11:05 a.m., family court judge Chuck Weller was shot in the chest as he stood in his courthouse office in Reno, Nevada. The police put the area into lockdown and vigorously searched for the shooter. The perpetrator did not fire at close range and was not in the courthouse with the judge. Rather, the bullet was fired from quite some distance. It smashed through the glass of the office before striking the judge. The police figured out that the shooter had fired from the 5th story of a parking garage across the river from the courthouse. This was a distance of 510 feet. When they looked at the video surveillance from the parking garage, they noticed a silver Ford Explorer arrived a few minutes before the shooting and left right after the shooting. They assumed the sniper used this vehicle. 2 hours after the shooting, the police received a report from a friend of Darren's who lived in Darren's townhouse. The friend reported an odd encounter he had that morning. He said that Darren's wife, Charlotte, dropped off Erica. After that, the friend heard the dog barking. When he investigated, he found the dog covered in blood. After this, he noticed Darren was acting strangely, and Darren's hand appeared to be injured. The police responded to Darren's townhouse and found 39-year-old Charlotte Mack dead in the garage. She had been stabbed in the neck. Darren Mack was the obvious suspect. The police searched his townhouse and found proof that he rented a silver Ford Explorer. bomb-making materials, ammunition, and a to-do list. Among other entries on this list, there were various firearms and the words, "End problem." Darren fled to Mexico. He hired attorneys and negotiated his surrender, which occurred on June 22, 2006. His trial started on October 1, 2006. Darren's attorneys mounted an insanity defense. Here is the story of the incident they introduced at trial. On the day of the incident, Charlotte arrived at Darren's townhouse at 9:15 a.m. to drop off Erica. During the exchange, Charlotte threatened Darren. At one point, when he turned his back on her, she knocked him to the floor. A pistol that he was carrying to protect himself from Charlotte fell out of his pocket. Charlotte retrieved the weapon, pointed it at Darren, and pulled the trigger. Amazingly, the weapon failed to discharge. Darren was able to produce a knife which he used to stab Charlotte to death in self-defense. This difficult-to-believe story explains why Darren killed Charlotte. But what about the attempted murder of the judge? Well, the defense had an explanation for that as well. They argued that the judge's unfair treatment of Darren made him delusional. Furthermore, when he shot the judge, he did not intend to kill him. There was no attempted murder. It seemed pretty clear that this defense strategy was not going to be successful, as it was patently ridiculous. So Darren went in a different and surprising direction. He decided to change his plea. On November 5, 2007, Darren pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and entered an Alford plea on the charge of attempted murder. So as far as the attempted murder on the judge, Darren was saying the state had enough evidence to convict him, but he maintained his innocence. The idea behind this strategy was to give Darren a chance of being released from prison someday. He was hoping to receive a lesser sentence because he pleaded guilty. 3 weeks after pleading guilty, Darren expressed some buyer's remorse. He fired his attorneys and tried to withdraw his pleas. He claimed he was pressured and manipulated into taking the deal. Darren was in a confused state because in jail he was tired, hot, and dehydrated. The motion to withdraw the pleas was rejected by the judge. Darren faced sentencing in February 2008. For the murder, he received a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. For the attempted murder, the sentence was 40 years, eligible for parole in 16 years. The sentences were consecutive, so Darren will be eligible for parole after 36 years when he is 83 years old. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Darren's first defense strategy involved the idea that he was chronically delusional. He used drugs and thought he was Benjamin Franklin. Maybe Darren thought that he could sign his own Declaration of Independence, one that made him independent from prison. Item number 2. Darren maintains his innocence in the sense that he only pleaded guilty to have a chance of getting out of prison someday, and he tried to withdraw his pleas. His story is that the killing of his wife was self-defense, and there was no intent to kill the judge. An unusual event occurred in Darren's case because of his motion to withdraw the guilty plea and the Alford plea. His original attorneys were compelled to testify about what Darren told them. Typically, of course, communication between an attorney and a client is confidential. The details about how Darren killed Charlotte left no doubt that self-defense was not part of the equation. For example, Darren did not initially tell his attorneys about a gun falling out of his pocket when Charlotte allegedly pushed him to the floor. As far as Darren's claim that he shot the judge but did not intend to kill him, that story is impossible to believe. Darren was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Item number 3. Charlotte Mack was respected by some people and despised by others. She was a polarizing figure. One recurring theme is how she had an extremely intense sex drive, at least during the first few years of her marriage to Darren. One relative said that Charlotte had an extraordinary ability to love people. Other people were not quite as generous with their descriptions, referring to Charlotte as vicious, aggressive, and not a good person. They believed Darren when he said that Charlotte threatened him and physically mistreated him. Some people even believed Darren acted in self-defense when he killed Charlotte. They maintained this belief even after Darren's guilty plea. Item number 4. Darren's complaints about the judge that he attempted to kill resonated with a lot of people. Many people condemned the shooting, but said they completely understood how Darren was driven to do it. Chuck Weller was an unpopular judge who was hated by many people who appeared before him. He consistently received low ratings, and attorneys wanted to avoid appearing in his courtroom. Many men complained about how Chuck appeared to be biased against males, but he drew complaints from women as well. In 2018, 12 years after the shooting, Chuck Weller was fined by the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline for making disturbing and offensive comments about women. At a domestic violence task force meeting in 2017, he said that women should be worried about proposed cuts to the Violence Against Women Act because the cuts, quote, will put women back in their place, unquote. When a female employee asked him, "Are you saying that we need to be put in a place?" Chuck responded, "Yes, the kitchen and the bedroom." Later, he tried to back away from these comments, claiming that he wasn't referring to his own opinion, but rather the opinion of people in Washington, D.C. One could argue that the only joy Chuck brought through his time as a judge was when he retired, not long after being fined. Item number 5, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. This case had 3 primary players, Darren, Charlotte, and Judge Chuck Weller. All 3 had a tendency to aggravate people, but Darren was by far the worst. He was self-centered, arrogant, vulnerable, petty, insecure, cold, callous, vindictive, resentful, manipulative, deceptive, impulsive, irresponsible, sensation-seeking, pessimistic, distrusting. He craved admiration, and he had a sense of entitlement. Many of his characteristics were consistent with being a victim narcissist. This is a particular expression of narcissism characterized by a strong desire for attention as a victim. Darren engaged in a pattern where he would antagonize people, like Charlotte and Chuck, then complain when he perceived some type of retaliation. There was a lack of insight here. Darren did not understand the effect of his aggressive and arrogant behavior. He believed his own feelings were the only ones which were valid. He appeared to have empathy for people who shared his beliefs, like those who wanted to reform the family court system, but that empathy was not real. If a person can only empathize with people who have the exact same feelings they have, that is not empathy. Rather, it is the person simply recognizing their own feelings. As Darren kept losing in court, he eventually embraced the idea of committing murder because he wanted revenge. The idea to kill could have come from the man who interviewed him for the web TV show, or it could have come from somewhere else. I do find it interesting that Darren initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, which is a defense the interviewer had mentioned. Maybe Darren really did believe he could serve just a little bit of time in prison after his crime. He thought everyone would look at all the injustices he endured and believe it would lead to insanity. Darren was shocked when he was sentenced to life in prison. In his mind, it was yet one more unfair ruling against him. Now moving to my final thoughts. Why did so many people resonate with Darren's desire to kill? Again, people did not endorse what he did, but they really connected with his motive. I think what happened here is that Judge Chuck Weller irritated a lot of people. Being a family court judge is a difficult job. They make decisions about custody and redistributing assets, which greatly affect people's lives. Unfortunately, the biases of these judges often influence their decisions. It is difficult to be neutral when dealing with emotionally charged topics. There are a lot of strong feelings about child care and who should have what income. The people subject to these decisions feel powerless, like no one is appreciating their point of view. They may even believe that the injustice leads to mental health difficulties. Some people offended by the judge probably looked at Darren and thought he had the courage to do something they wanted to do but would never do. In a sense, maybe they really did support the violence, although they did not want to admit that. It's important to remember that violence is never the answer. In family court, there will be winners and losers. Often, everyone is a loser. Nobody is happy with the rulings. Being unhappy doesn't justify murder. Through his crimes, Darren may have achieved what he perceived to be a victory, but he lost everything to get it. He gave up his freedom and his fortune to satisfy his vindictiveness. One would think that a pawn shop owner would be skilled at negotiating a good deal, but Darren failed to recognize a bad trade. Those are my thoughts on the case of Darren Mack. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.